Welcome all to the ADCLOD Podcast series with Social Impact Founders, an initiative by the Ashank Desai Centre for Leadership and Organisational Development at IIM Ahmedabad. In this podcast, we document and celebrate the leadership journeys of India's homegrown social entrepreneurs who have built impactful institutions from the ground up. In today's episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Mirai Chatterjee, a public health professional, labor activist, and one of the most enduring leaders within SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, about which many of you might have heard. SEWA is one of India's largest and most influential trade unions and people's organizations. Mirai joined SEWA over 4 decades ago and has since built SEWA's social security vertical into a nationally recognized model of health, insurance, and care for women workers in the informal economy. Mirai Chatterjee holds a BA from Harvard University in History and Science and a Master of Public Health from Johns Hopkins University, and has worked alongside SEWA's founder, Ela Bhatt, who unfortunately is no longer with us, to expand health, childcare, and social protection for over 3.8 million self-employed women across Gujarat and beyond. Just the number 3.8 million is staggering. Mirai Chatterjee has served on national and international bodies, including the WHO Commission on Social Determinants of Health and various government of Indian committees. She is the recipient of several honors for her contributions to public health and informal sector. Mirai Chatterjee, welcome to our podcast. It is indeed a privilege and an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Neharika. Thank you for having me.
I really look forward to the conversation today, Mirai, with you. So
Me
to
too.
start off with, let me ask a question just about the work and the impact of your work. Mirai, could you give us a picture of what SEWA looks like today, its scale, the range of issues it addresses, the geographies it operates in, and the nature of membership and workforce?
Neharika, thanks a lot again. And I would like to start from the size and nature of the informal economy in India, because I'm not sure that all our viewers and our audience are aware. 93% of the Indian workforce is informal. And if we speak about the women's workforce, more than 94% is informal. So who are these women? These women are our members at SEWA, and they are manual laborers and service providers. They are street vendors, they are home-based workers, and they're small producers or own account workers producing snacks, artisans, and so on. Manual laborers and service providers, if we unpack that a little further, the largest group are smallholder farmers, and as we know, women are the farmers of our country. Domestic workers, construction workers, women who work in the forests of our country, and basically sell their labor for survival. So these are our members, and as you said, we are now 3.8 million, from starting with a handful of, less than 1,000 women 50 years plus ago. Who would have thought? This is the story of the amazing women of our country. And today we are spread across 20 states, from Ladakh and Jammu Kashmir down to Kerala and Gujarat, Rajasthan in the west, to Nagaland, Meghalaya, Assam in the east. So the SEWA movement, as we like to call it, has grown. The mother organization is SEWA, the trade union, but it's a very different type of trade union because, as you said, most of our members are purely self-employed. As I said, the mass of our members are self-employed, meaning they're smallholder farmers, street vendors, and so on. 2/3, in fact, of our membership. And the rest have a floating sort of employer-employee relationship. So therefore, we are a different type of union. And as I said, we are in several sectors of the Indian economy. But very early in our history, quite early actually, just 2 years into our history, our late founder Ela Bhatt realized that when you're organizing self-employed workers for their unity, for their solidarity, for their sisterhood, then it's a very different type of approach that you have to take. Why? Because there's no fixed employer-employee relations for most of our members, as I said already. And therefore, a whole lot of services were developed, the first of which was financial services. So SEWA Bank was formed as the world's first women's cooperative bank, and then followed by an artisan cooperative, and then several other cooperatives. So it's a joint action of union and cooperative, because we found through praxis, and I'll come to that a little later maybe, that this was a very effective strategy for organizing informal women workers. And then also because there are multiple needs of informal women workers. If we want to help our sisters to come out of poverty and move towards self-reliance for themselves and their families, then livelihood is a base, but there are many other things that are required. In fact, the women say very beautifully that livelihood and social protection are two sides of the same coin. One without the other doesn't make sense. And social protection like healthcare, childcare, and insurance, as you mentioned, are very much required. And these have also been cooperativized so that they are self-reliant organizations used, run, and owned by the women themselves.
Excellent. Excellent. So in a way, you've also told us where and how some of the pivots of SEWA happened. So let me ask you a question further from there, that SEWA social security, part of what you have been doing very closely, has pioneered models of community health workers. So there are the SEWA Arogya Sevaks, microinsurance, child care, mobile creches, and integrated care for informal workers. How do you personally assess this body of work? What are you most proud of, and what do you feel still remains to be done?
Thanks a lot, Neharika. But if you don't mind, I'd like to just go back a little bit into our history, how we came into cooperative.
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting, and there are lessons in there for leadership embedded in there.
For sure. Absolutely.
So it happened like this, that IIM was organizing informal workers, the women, and the first thing that the women said, who were mostly old clothes vendors, vegetable vendors, those were our early members. And how come they were early members? Because the menfolk and their families were in the Textile Labor Association, from which SEWA was born. That was our history. So these were our early members, and their issue when IIM sat with them and discussed was that they didn't have access to financial services. That time in the 70s, early 70s, the banks had been nationalized. So they went and met with the bankers, and the bankers took one look at these women and said, no, we can't open accounts for these kind of women, and they'll take loans and they'll run away and we'll never see them again. Those were the days before microfinance. So this was what the women had to face. And so the women famously, particularly one of my mentors, Chanda Ben, an old clothes vendor who never went to school, who never knew how to read and write, said famously, we are poor, but we are many. And at that time, there were 4,000 members in SEWA. So these women like Chanda Ben went house to house to house and collected 10 rupees share capital at the time. And with 40,000 share capital, they went to the Reserve Bank of India officer in charge and asked him to give them a license. And he was horrified. He said, what is this group of women who can't even read and write? He told IIM, go home, you're a nice woman. This is a suicidal effort. But the women, and this is an abiding theme throughout SEWA's history, were not to be bowed down. They stayed up all night with IIM and they learned how to sign their name. They went back to the officer and said, bring a piece of paper and a pen. And they signed their names. And the story goes that he was so moved that he said, okay, you got your license. And that's how SEWA Bank was formed, by these 4,000 women who had faith in their own strength and sisterhood and solidarity and had so much self-belief, even though they were poor working people. And then this being the world's first women's cooperative bank, then there was no looking back. Because in a year, the women ran it well. They were elected to the board of the cooperative, and they made sure that their cooperative bank was viable within a year. No grants from outside, no subsidies. So that was one lesson. And I think the lesson from there is that you listen to people at the grassroots, their wisdom. They may not have big degrees like many of us, but they have insight. They have talent. They're intelligent. They're smart as anything and anybody. And they show us the way. And that has been an abiding sort of article of faith, I would say, in SEWA. The second interesting experience which led us to this joint action, which I mentioned of union and cooperatives, is that we were organizing quilt makers. In Gujarati, we call them Khol Sivnar Behne in Daryapur, which is a neighborhood in the walled city of Ahmedabad. And they had contractors who were giving them work and were exploiting them. They were sewing 60 pieces of cloth into a quilt cover, and they were hardly getting 25 paisa per quilt. And the contractors and larger merchants were their own family members. In fact, one leader of the struggle, Karima Ben, who is also unfortunately not with us anymore, she's passed away, her own brother was exploiting her. So this was the situation. And so these women struck work for income. The strike failed. Why did it fail? Because the women were too poor, they couldn't hold out, and the merchants and contractors targeted the most vulnerable women. The single widows like Karima Ben, the divorced mothers like Rahima Ben. And it was then that Karima Ben, Rahima Ben and others said, we know how to sew. We are with SEWA. If you help us get the raw materials, the waste rags from the textile mills, and help us sell, help us set up a small shop in Daryapur, then why don't we work for ourselves? So that was the second cooperative of SEWA, which then they called Sabina. Sabina did very well. More women were drawn like a magnet to Sabina because they were paid better than the contractors were offering.
Sure.
And as a result, what happened, the contractors and merchants had to raise the wage rate. So again, by accident, and again by listening to women's wisdom and talent and skills, appreciating their skills, we fell upon a good strategy, just by chance. And the last, if I may, experience was when we began organizing rural workers. So these were people who are landless agricultural laborers who worked outside Ahmedabad for larger landlords. So what happened again with the trade union and background and being a labor lawyer, there were negotiations with the landlords. The labor department was brought in. And we had, of course, the support of the Textile Labor Association, which was a large and prominent union in the city. And we went to the village and, landlords were there, laborers were there organized by SEWA and the labor department. So everyone had an open, transparent discussion. Wages were given in cash in front of everybody. So everybody knew what was going on. And then everybody went home quite happy with the result. At night, the landlord's goons went back to the laborers, beat them up, and took the money back. And it was then that Ilaben said my eyes were opened that in this country, which has a labor surplus, if you don't have multiple economic opportunities, if you don't have alternatives, then laborers, informal workers are bound hand and foot to these kind of vested interests and exploitative forces. So in sum, all of this pushed us towards this joint strategy of union and cooperatives. And I think what's unique about Ilaben's leadership, many things that are unique about her leadership, was that, there was the grassroots organizing, which she always said is the basic building block. So the workers were organized. In all these three examples, there was unity, there was solidarity, and then listening to them, the strategies were developed. So the strategies didn't fall out of the clear blue sky. They were sort of co-created with our eyes and ears to the ground. So I really wanted to share that insight.
Lovely. And what was the role of, let's say, Ilaben or people like you when these strategies were evolving? So how did you come in that?
Sure. I'll come to that in a minute, but would you like me to go back to the social protection question, or shall we deal with that?
I'll come back to the social protection question.
Sure.
I'd really like to understand.
Sure. So honestly, I was a college student in the US. I had not heard about SEWA, but I was active in student politics on campus, in the Women's Clearinghouse, about sexual harassment. My own roommate had been, unfortunately, almost assaulted. So there were all those kinds of issues. And while working on women's issues, and also that the big issue in those days at Harvard was the issue of divestment of Harvard's investments in South Africa. So all this churning was going on. And in the middle of this, one of my friends said, have you heard of interesting things that are happening in your own country? And that's how I heard about SEWA. This was in 1978, when Ilaben had just won the Maxit and was just beginning to be known as a leader of the labor movement and women's movement in India, and a little bit cooperative movement also. So that's how come I heard. Fortuitously, I had an uncle here at the National Institute of Design, and I had been coming to IIM also, interestingly, and met Professor Ravi Mathai, and was taken for that famous Jawaja experiment when I was still a teenager. Anyway, so I was introduced to Ilaben by my uncle, and one thing that she said stuck with me. She said, we need young women like you who are educated and who are ready to work shoulder to shoulder with our members, and keep it in mind and finish your studies. So I kept it in mind. And when I was done, I came and I said, here I am. You told me to keep it in mind. And then she said 3 things. Will you be able to work with women who have no education, zero education, or much less than you? And I said, yes, I'm ready for that. Then will you learn Gujarati and be close to the women? And I said, yes, I'm ready. And the 3rd thing she said is, will you wear khadi? And I said, yes, I'd love to wear khadi. So there was no looking back.
Wow. So, but when you were in college and you were at the best of the institutions of the world, did you not have other options, people asking you to join elsewhere, or your classmates joining UN or something like that? Did you not have that as a bait in that sense?
Well, that bait is always there for us people who have had the privilege of a good education.
Right.
I think a couple of things. I think it's to do with values of the family. My parents are the same generation as Ilaben and her late husband Ramesh Bhai. And they were young when India became free, and they believed in nation building. They were idealistic. And I think those values were transmitted very clearly, that if you have a good education, you should serve the rest of our fellow citizens. So I think that was somewhere at the back. And I had already figured out by the time I went to Harvard that poverty was an outrage and that there was a lot of injustice in the world, and that had to be changed. So SEWA was a good fit for me. Frankly, I stepped into SEWA the first day in my khadi sari, and the vibrations made me feel, somehow I've been led to this place. Yeah, it's fortuitous. I'm lucky.
Yeah.
So I still feel that.
How nice. Thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself. So coming back to the question on how SEWA Social Security has pioneered models of community health workers, and how do you assess that work? So what's the work, and also how do you assess it?
Sure. So the other interesting thing which might be of interest to your viewers is that when I first joined, Ilaben advised me, don't come with any formula. Keep an open mind. I know you have a degree from a public health institution, but keep an open mind. And for the first few months, just observe and listen. And then she put me in charge of 2 women, one Chanda Ben, who I've already mentioned, and Suman Ben. Neither of them had ever been to school, but so wise. And they understood life and living and grassroots organizing. And they took me to a slum on the river bank here, Shankar Bhuvan, which is still there near the Hotel Kama. And I spent 6 months going there every day, and listening and observing and absorbing and understanding what are the public health issues. And then we began to train women as sort of barefoot doctors, or, now luckily no one is anymore barefoot. But anyway, community health workers. And when we had sort of 50 community health workers trained in the basics of public health, first aid, maternal and child health, occupational health, then we decided to form a cooperative. Actually, I had no idea about cooperative. And Ilaben and Ramesh Bhai sat me down and explained, and I couldn't get my head around it, because it was not something I had learned in public health school. Basically, it's taking the service and converting it into a collective enterprise, which was beyond my experience. But anyway, they explained lovingly and patiently. And I think, to answer your question, what makes me very proud is that our Lok Swasthya Seva Health Cooperative is the first of its kind, not only in Gujarat, but all over India, where grassroots women themselves are providing health education, health awareness. Earlier, they were doing much more on first aid, even giving basic medicines. But now government happily has come much more into the public health space. And so now their work is more health education, as I said, health awareness, linking people with the government schemes, health schemes, but also other entitlements like the public distribution system, pensions, then of course the government's health insurance, Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, and many other schemes, and doing all this digitally. I just think that, if we only had faith in the people of our country, they are our greatest resource, even though they have had none of the opportunities many of us have had. They may not have had such an education, but see where the trajectory from people who had so little, they're now serving their communities. During COVID, their families said, don't step out. It's dangerous. You'll endanger all of us. They served where others didn't reach. So really, I salute these women of our country who are open, who grab opportunities, who are willing to learn. Now they are running a digital health passport where they've digitized all women's documents and linked them to the DigiLocker so that, they don't get lost, and then they seamlessly can be connected to the various schemes and entitlements that are due. So I think when you ask me what have I been proud of, I think whether it's healthcare, childcare, or insurance is not an easy subject at all. Try selling insurance to grassroots workers who hardly earn 200, 300 rupees a day. And they're doing it. I want to give you the example of my sister Asha Ben Ajmeri. She was a garment worker earning 4,000 rupees a month. Today she insures 3,000 people in her catchment area, and she's earning 5,000 a month. And the total insurance premium she brings in is 30 lakhs per annum. And of course, there are others who aren't maybe as able as her. But I see these women, where they were and where they are. Now, Asha Ben, of course, has built another story on her house. She sent her children to London to study. I mean, it's really, these are the stories of empowerment which keep us going. So we have the health cooperative, to answer your question. Within a year, we were financially sustainable and independent of the union. How did that happen? Again, back to the women. They said our biggest expenses are medicines. Why don't you open a medicine counter in the Angan, in the courtyard of SEWA? So, I said, okay, I never thought of it. They thought of it. So we went to the wholesale market, bought medicines, sold them. Within a year, it was sustainable. We just had 70,000 working capital initially. And then the municipal corporation heard about this endeavor, and a superintendent of one of the hospitals, municipal hospitals, LG Hospital, said, I'll give you space in my hospital compound. Why don't you run like this counter 24 for my patients? So we did, and they gave us seed money. They gave 5 lakhs seed money, and they said you can use that. Of course, we returned it to them as well. That's part of the story. And when that did well, then they said, why only one municipal hospital? Come to another municipal hospital, Shardaben Hospital, where even more working class poor people go. So we did that. And from those revenues, this health cooperative became not only sustainable, and today it has a team of about 200 part-time, grassroots health workers come educators who all get a living from the cooperative, plus another 50 full-time staff, totally self-financed, totally from the revenues. Then from the revenues, we set up an Ayurvedic production center. That has become successful and making profit, or in cooperative language, surplus. So I'm giving this example just to say, the women of this country, as we say in Hindi or Gujarati, jitna aap unki taarif kare, how much praise you can heap on them is not enough. Honestly, truly, this has been my experience.
Wow.
And the same with childcare. That was also first of its kind cooperative. It took 2 years for the cooperative department in 1986 to agree to register the cooperative. Why? Because they said, what sort of cooperative is this? How will you ever make money? But the cooperative is not 100% sustainable, because childcare is not a low-income, low-cost business. We have to take care of our children well and feed them. But it's, I would say at least 2/3 of the way there. Insurance cooperative, again, story of first of its kind, like SEWA Bank, like the health cooperative, like the childcare cooperative. It's been sustainable. It took us a while. because insurance is a difficult concept for people to grasp. Educated middle-class people, what to speak about working class.
Yes.
But it's been, for more than 14 years, we've been totally financially viable.
Wow. So I also hear, and I know this isn't we talked about, but I also hear that there's a constant cross-subsidizing of one initiative with the other. So even if it's not sustainable today, there are others that are doing that. Am I right in saying
that's correct? And also the cooperatives innovate. Let me give you the example of the childcare cooperative, which is still not financially sustainable.
Sure.
And we now feel that, it's not fair also to put the entire burden of fees or user fees on poor people who are hardly earning 300 to 500 rupees per day. So they pay 500 rupees a month. But what we are trying to do is to go to banks and other formal sector settings, which are supposed to run creches for their staff. So one such good experience we've had is with the Reserve Bank of India in Ahmedabad, and their women officers wanted a creche. So the RBI, Reserve Bank of India, Ahmedabad, gave us the space, and they did it up nicely for the children. But just to tell you, the inequality in our country, which really hurts. These women are paying 7,000 per month per child, and our members are paying 500 with difficulty, and we're trying to get them to 600, and that's only covering a third of the costs. So our strategy now is to offer our services, quality services, to formal sector settings, and then cross-subsidizing.
Lovely.
So we're not dependent on outside grants. But we have to, at the moment, get outside grants too.
Of course. Which also brings me to my next question that, SEWA's work obviously has been shaped by its members. That is what we have heard. Government policy, international bodies like the ILO and the WHO, and by donors. In the social sector, there's often this question that, when you have others giving you the money, have there been external pressures that have pulled SEWA in a direction from maybe that is not what the members want to go there? And if yes, how have you navigated the tension?
That's a good question. And I was just trying to think one example that came to mind in the early days. See, fortunately for us, what has happened now is we're quite large and we're quite well known. Of course, we have a long way to go. By no means is the work over. It will continue for generations. But we have the bargaining power now that we did not have earlier. So earlier, I recall that when we were working with government on health, on public health, the main thing that they were interested was reducing women's fertility. Tell them not to have so many babies, and, without all the support system and enabling environment that creates conditions for women to want to limit their families. And anyway, it's not simply a woman's decision, it's a joint decision. And oftentimes most often she doesn't have choice, even today.
Yes.
So I think when that happened, we dug our heels. I remember digging our heels in a bit and saying, look, we will talk about family planning, but we'll talk about it in a holistic manner, in the whole manner of women's health. What are women's concerns? And reproductive and sexual health will only be one of the whole. So we were able to negotiate that even quite early on because it made sense to the government at the time and the donors. And, we've been really fortunate. We've had donors within the UN system who have been quite flexible, and other donors, like I should mention in particular the Ford Foundation, which actually gave the seed money to build up our social protection team. And they have been and continue to be extremely flexible and quite hands-off, so long as, you deliver and all the financials are in order, which is as it should be. But one other thing I wanted to say, when I was explaining about these cooperatives is by no means is the work over. Honestly, I'm really proud of where we have collectively reached, but we have a very long way to go. And as I said, the childcare cooperative is still not sustainable, but also the insurance. Now we're finding a regulatory barrier. I wanted to mention that. Women have shown that microinsurance works, just as microfinance and credit and all savings and credit work. But the barrier is that to have a license to be a full-fledged insurer, you have to have a initial capital of 100 crore. And, we've been trying to explain to the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India for the last, I think, 35 years. We've written to all the finance ministers of all the governments. We've had meetings with them. Ilaben has convened meetings, and they're all open and empathetic, sympathetic. But this is a big leap of faith. So one of the things we did manage to get was a committee by the IRDA, which reviewed the whole situation. And in fact, I had the privilege of being the chair of that committee. And we worked with the regulatory authorities and their own actuaries. And we worked out that we didn't need more than 20 crores. Because our ticket size is what? The smallest premium is 50 rupees per annum.
Correct.
That's what women can afford. And then there are, then maximum 1,000 or 2,000 premium per annum, savings-linked insurance. They can't pay more than that. So where do you need 100 crores, that volume of capital? Anyway, that's still a work in progress, and we were hopeful when the insurance bill came up for discussion in Parliament recently, and they've opened up the insurance sector to FDI, more foreign direct investment, but we are where we are. So there are a lot of these kinds of issues also. And also, my dream is that we have universal social protection for the informal workers of this country.
Correct.
For the tiny segment of formal sector workers, government civil servants, railway, defense, they're well taken care of. And that's fine. More power to them. But what about the mass of Indian citizens, these 93%? How can we increase some kind of coverage, social protection coverage? It's improving, not to say that nothing is to be done, but it has to be a holistic. And in one commission that you mentioned that I was in, the Commission on the Unorganized Sector, chaired by late Professor Arjun Sengupta, we calculated at the time, it must have gone up, that all it requires is 0.5% of Indian GDP. Wow. Surely that's not too much to ask.
Oh.
So
no.
My view is still we have universal healthcare, universal childcare, universal some basic social protection, minimum coverage for all Indians. We cannot rest.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I hope your dream does come true very soon is what we would like. All right. So coming into the running of an organization which is actually membership based in an informal economy, I'm sure comes with multiple unique challenges such as navigating caste, class, language, geography, precarity of the members' lives. So what have been some of the significant organizational hurdles that you have faced and how have you overcome?
Thank you for that. Well, the first thing I want to say, which might surprise your audience, is that we have never found education level to be a barrier. You work around it. That's the reality. As I've been saying, the Chanda Bens and Karima Bens have shown that they may not have big degrees, fancy degrees, but they're smart and they know what they want and they're embedded. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second is that the article of faith that Ilaben shared with us and that we have witnessed firsthand all these years is the tremendous strength of women in our country. And so the way SEWA is organized is that the workers themselves are elected to the union's executive committee and also all the cooperatives. So 80% of the board members are elected from among the working class themselves. And 20% are what Ilaben called white blouse walis, like myself. So we are there to support, to encourage, and initially to lead also. I mean, the health cooperative, I was the chair, and insurance also for many years. But now it's handed over to third and fourth generation of workers themselves, as it should be. And we feel that if you do appropriate capacity building, the basics of management, financial management, how to read a balance sheet, how to run a board meeting, maintain minutes, agenda, and all that, and then make sure that there's financial probity, regular audits, and so on, then we're well on our way. And what I've seen is that women ask really intelligent questions of our finance team when we're in the board meetings. They ask, why is this expense made? Why not this way? They give the policy direction. Let me give you an example. We were running those low-cost pharmacies, but now seeing our model, the government has started the Jan Aushadhi, ours and many others, Jan Aushadhi. And whatever it is, they're running in the hospital. So naturally, people come less to our pharmacies And luckily, we already had pivoted to Ayurveda business. But it was the women who said that given this reality, we should put all our strengths, and we will put all our strengths into our Ayurvedic production. And now, fortuitously, the government is also very supportive, the present government and so on.
Sure.
And, that is generating good revenues, which is then paying for all the grassroots work and the health education, health awareness. So those are the kinds of things that in leadership we've kept in mind. And the other thing, as I've been emphasizing from the beginning, is she said is keep close to the women. Keep listening to them. Then you won't lose your way. Because they know the ground realities like no one else. How could I know? I'm not even from this state. This is my adopted state. And they understand all the nuances. And fortunately, our Gujarat, we are quite entrepreneurial here. So there's a lot of, we don't have to teach some of the women about business mindset. Some we do, but many we don't. So that's all very helpful. I think the second thing I'd like to say is the SEWA way of leadership, which is decentralized leadership and collective leadership. And in some ways, the nature of the membership-based organizations we've created, union and cooperatives, their sort of collective leadership is in the DNA because there's a board elected from the members and then they sit together and decide. So there's not one supreme leader who takes all the decisions. It's a democratic form of organization, both union and cooperative. They are worker-owned, worker-run. Of course, I'm not saying that women like myself and my other colleagues who are also from middle class and educated with degrees, not that we are not needed. We need professionals. But actually, we've turned the definition of professionals on its head. Professionals are not just people who are educated and have a degree, but they're people who deliver, who pursue excellence, who, manage things in an inclusive, democratic manner, those kinds of attributes and values, actually. So perhaps it's not that different from the Indian Institute of Management way of leadership, but perhaps the difference is that the women themselves are on the boards. And honestly, that makes all the difference. And I think that's what's really unique about SEWA. And outsiders, when they come, they immediately pick that up. So decentralized leadership by the working class, slowly building it up. It doesn't happen overnight. As I said, for a long time I was leading. And the other article of faith is the faith in what we call Agevans in Gujarati, which are the grassroots women leaders. They are actually, I would say, the pillar and the backbone of SEWA because they're embedded. They're local. They live and work in their own communities and neighborhoods, villages and mohallas, urban neighborhoods. And they are in constant touch with the workers in a way that some of us will never be those kind of insiders. So I think those are some of the things that we've learned from 11. The other important thing about leadership is she always said Agevans are those who make sure that others are ahead of you. Meaning, you support others to find their leadership and charge. And she also said being a cadre-based organization, building a movement. See, we're doing two things at the same time. We're running our organizations, cooperatives, unions, as they may be, and also we are running a movement, which means that you have to connect with people outside of the SEWA family, other workers in India and globally. But we must make sure that after we are not there are at least 3 or 4 people behind us who are ready to take movement and our organizations forward. So these are some of, I think, unique elements of the SEWA movement.
Mirai, one follow-up question. We are a very diverse society, right? And we have all kinds of people who live together. And then if you have them come up together to do something, do some of those diversities come in the way? And people, we always form in groups and out groups. And so does some of that come in the way? And how do you deal with that? Or does purpose unite in such a way that it doesn't really matter?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I think working together, shoulder to shoulder, breaks down a lot of barriers, prejudices, and biases. We begin our day in prayer in the tradition of Gandhiji, Sarva Dharam, all faith prayer every day. We say from the Holy Quran, we say the Sarva Dharam prayer that Gandhiji taught at Sabarmati Ashram. And we take the 11 vows that are written on the walls of Sabarmati Ashram, one of which is non-practicing of untouchability, treating everyone equally, and Sarvadharam, respecting all faiths equally. So I think, that gets into your blood after a while. If every day you're sitting together and praying together and singing together and working together, that changes hearts and minds. However, things are not so simple. We all have multiple identities. We live in families and communities and society. So there have been occasions when we have training sessions and some people from one caste say, we will not eat together. When we all eat together, we will not sit together with so-and-so. And we have said, well, this is how it is. You are welcome, but nothing will change in this. This is how we function. These are our culture. These are our values. We don't believe in caste and all this caste and class and even religious discrimination. So we have to sit together. That's how it is. And initially, some are uncomfortable. But I think, the big factor is the economic empowerment. Yeah. When she gets a loan from SEWA Bank to, reclaim her mortgage land, when she gets a buffalo in the family from the loan or money for scholarship for her child, then slowly these barriers go. Because it's useful to have an organization backing you up like this. So that's one thing I want to say. And as we know, in Ahmedabad city, unfortunately, we have a history of violence between different communities. So we have been put to the test in those times. But I'm proud to say, we had mixed teams that went into the areas, did relief work, and not a hair on our head was touched because people said, ye khadi wale hain, sewa ki behne aaye hain. They have come in peace. They come offer services, to offer solace, to offer support. And we went to all areas and all communities. So I think, and I think all this working together, praying together, as I said, that builds the dividend over the years. So I won't say there aren't challenges, and sometimes we don't know exactly what our members are thinking because we are embedded in society. But we move forward together.
What you're saying is that when there is a clarity on what is a non-negotiable, some of these things become, they start to fall in place. And also the fact that there's an economic backing or there's a reason, economic reason changes people's behaviors, at least if not their hearts.
Yeah. And one more thing, also the services, like in the childcare centers, everybody's children come.
Correct.
So they're eating together, praying together, playing together from a young age. Parents come, mothers and fathers for the parents meet. So all that helps.
Absolutely. Lovely. So I know you said that a large number of your people in the organization are coming from the grassroots, but there is a certain number that also come from colleges, the graduates. And so the question is, how are you able to attract them? Both people from the grassroots, which I can see more easy, but how are people who have degrees like you attracted to come to work in SEWA? Is there some strategies you have, or are there some things that anyone can learn about attracting talent?
Well, like everyone else, we're constantly scouting around for talent. And what we find is that people find us. There are always young people of all ages who want to contribute towards society and to particularly work. And of course, SEWA's name helps a lot. Sometimes we're not sure if they're coming for the name and what seems to be the glamour. I mean, I don't know what glamour there is in our work. It's all hard work, boots on the ground, chappals on the ground. But, people know that Hillary Clinton comes and visits SEWA, that all these dignitaries come. So I think people think, oh, there's something nice going on here. So we have to be careful also. And we welcome people, but we also may want to make sure, as far as possible, that they're coming for the right reason, which is to serve women, which is to work at the grassroots. And then other things will follow if they are to follow. So there's no easy answer for this. We are all hunting in the same talent pool. But we are fortunate that we do find young people who come, as I said, who want to make a difference. I mean, times have changed. They may not stay for 40 years like some of us did. And that's okay. But they also get hooked. We have a lot of young people who've been 5 years, 10 years, because they become close to the women. They understand they're making the difference. They get a good night's sleep because they feel work satisfaction. And also keeping the work culture supportive. It's really important. Keeping it open, supportive. Young people, as all of us, have a lot of questions. People like myself who've been around a bit, are there to support, to listen, to understand their fears and worries and whatsoever. So that's important. I think creating a culture and also a culture of openness and learning.
Right.
We've changed a lot. We were not digitized much. And as I said, now the women are using digital health passports linked to DigiLocker. How about that? So this is fine. One issue that we have is, we can't compete with the IIMs and others of this world, to be perfectly honest with you. So that's one thing that we do tell our young people when they come for interviews, or any people, that see, if you're looking for a highly paid job, this is not the place. We'll do what we can, but we don't want to have a huge gap because we believe in equity. And those who are coming are expected to make some salary sacrifice. Not too much, but some. So that message is also made very clear from the beginning. But you will learn, you will have amazing experiences. There'll be capacity building, there'll be opportunities for policy, giving policy input, research. So for your career, well, it's a good place to start.
Great, lovely. Also, so in terms of compensation, are you competitive as compared to other NGOs, or does that not even come into the picture?
I think we're quite competitive from what I've learned, and depends with compared to whom. Not compared to Delhi and Bombay because, things are much more expensive in the big metros. But I think by Ahmedabad standards, I think we're doing okay. I'm sure some of the very educated young professionals are taking a cut and they could earn much more. But they have understood that, and most of them accept that. They find it hard, but mostly they accept it.
And when you have, you also have your own, members in Nagaland and Ladakh. And so how does that work? So you have also a staff there, or is most of it done from Ahmedabad?
So as I mentioned, our approach is a decentralized approach, which is again very much a Gandhian thing because SEWA is inspired by Gandhiji's values. So each of the SEWAs are autonomous. They're separately registered. They have separately elected boards.
Okay.
Often us here in Gujarat, we are there to support our sisters in Nagaland, Ladakh, Bihar, or wherever. Just because we have the experience, we were kind of first off the block.
Correct.
But they are totally independent. Any capacity building, training, exposure, support with fundraising, all of that we'll do. But we don't control sitting in Ahmedabad. How can we? We don't know the reality, language, culture in Ladakh, Nagaland, or anywhere. To give you an example, in Bihar, we are now developing 150 creches in two very poor districts, Gaya and Katihar. And because we have a lot of experience in social protection and running childcare, we have been going, I personally have been going and spending time there with the colleagues and, sharing the experience. But it can't be it's not a cookie cutter approach. It has to be tweaked, but the basic principles remain. So we support in that way. But each are autonomous, independent, and it should be so, and we're federated.
Okay, great. And how about skill development and leadership development? Is that again centralized, or is that also completely decentralized? And what are some of your approaches to some of these?
Well, some are centralized and some are decentralized. Like we have a pool of Agevans. I mentioned these frontline grassroots workers.
Yes.
So building their capacity in leadership, it's important for a bit of centralization in the sense that we develop modules from experience, and then these women from different districts and even different states come together because there's a lot of cross-learning. It's not about us just giving them a dose. They learn from each other. They're inspired by each other and role models of older Agevans who share their stories, their struggles, and so on. So sometimes we have to centralize. Give you an example, we have Agevans here in Gujarat and we wanted to expose them to some of the laws that pertain to women and labor laws. and also the Indian Constitution. So we invited legal experts to come and explain in simple language. So that all has to be centralized. But some of the technical skill training, whether it's on agriculture, how to grow mushrooms, how to be a paravet and take care of goats, that all has to be decentralized and tweaked and contextualized. So it's a mixture of both, I would say.
Nice. And do you work with the state government system, let's say draw on the Agriculture University or the Veterinarian Institute to help some of these women or get them to translate it for you?
Very much so. I mean, SEWA has always worked closely with state governments, right from local level to national level, because the government is the biggest development actor and because it's they who set up policies and laws, some of which we go about trying to change, of course. So we work very closely with them from the beginning. And also, we are not the government of India, or even our state government. So we can't be, for example, setting up childcare all across the country. I mentioned universal childcare. Necessarily, we have to work with the government and show what works and could work and so on and so forth. So yeah, we work closely with the agriculture universities and whoever we can. We've worked with IIM, we've worked with many others, not just government, private universities, researchers, and we've been so fortunate that as part of the SEWA movement, all of you have been involved, quite frankly, in one way or the other.
Great. Thank you. Also, one of the interesting things I think that is very special in a social impact organization and especially in SEWA is the fact that there are so many different stakeholders. There is government, there's international donor agencies, there are private HNIs, there is all over everything. So what is the role of the leadership in actually managing these stakeholders and how do you do it?
I think again I come to Ila Ben, our extraordinary leader from whom women like me learned so much. We were so privileged to have her mentorship, although she would never like that word, but just leading by example. Yes. And I think what was really unique about her was her openness, and she had a talent for finding people in different sectors of society and the economy who could be useful to our members, joining hands and seeing what could be done. And as I said, we're very fortunate that many people have stepped forward. Some we found them, some they found us. We managed them sort of in different ways, if you will. I think the first step was always having them come and meet with the women, be in the field, see the grassroots, see the reality. That is critical.
Correct.
And then again, her decentralized leadership approach. It wasn't like she was dealing with everybody. I mean, if I speak about the social protection team, she hardly dealt with the insurance authorities. Initially, she opened some of the doors, but then it was left for us to take it forward. She trusted us. She had faith in us. And of course, whenever we go and meet with these different stakeholders outside of the SEWA family, the women are always with us because they speak in their own voice and, that representation is very important. And I think more than people like myself, frankly, people like in the insurance authority and others, they listen to the women because they don't hear these kind of voices often. So I think, there's various ways of managing the relationship, but the key is that faith was put in us, trust was put in us to take things forward. And sometimes we made mistakes also. We learned. We burnt our hands, but that's part of growing and learning and moving forward.
Is there any secrets that you would like to share with us of how you keep your teams motivated? People motivated, like you've been motivated for 45 years to continue.
The big secret is just working closely with women at the grassroots and every day seeing the change that they are making. It may not be big, huge changes, but step by step in their families, in their communities, we see that change. It's tangible. We see how their children are now in London or Delhi or wherever, maybe at IIM also, I'm sure. So that's just so rewarding. I just feel this is how change is made in this country, like Gandhiji taught us, bottom up. And it's not fast, it's slow. We have to be patient, we have to be persistent and persevere. but we have faith we will get there. When women lead, there is peace, there is work. Yeah, so Ilaben often said that, women, work and peace, these kind of go together. And God knows we need that, because in today's world, which is so polarized and so much violence, we need women working together. And I feel the biggest lesson of SEWA is that if so many lakhs of women from across the country speaking 20 different languages or more, different castes, communities, religious groups can come together and create a movement, surely this is a small lesson for the rest of us.
Absolutely.
So that's what keeps us going, Neharika. That's what kept going. As I said, I got hooked. I never left.
Can I ask you also the question that, while you started to trust the women because of their wisdom, what you saw them for, how did these women trust, you or people like you who are, educated, may have a little bit of a chip on the shoulder? I'm not saying that's you, but I'm just saying you just start to believe that I know a little bit more than everybody else. So how did that trust got built?
So that's a good question. I remember when I first went to Shankar Bhavan, they looked me up and down and said, this baby won't last here more than a week. So they were like, where is she dropped out of the sky from? But I think it's, again, through action. Action speaks louder than words. If you helped their child who was very sick with pneumonia get cured by taking her for referral to a hospital, as I said, also helping them get a concrete economic benefit, that's how the trust is built. Slow and steady, but working together. But I think, poorer people in our country, they are much more open to people like us. I feel like we got acceptance quickly. Oh yeah, one more thing, which was, they said, if you want to talk to us, first learn our language. So, learning the language, the culture, learning how to do garba, learning their songs, eating with them, their food, we became friends for life.
Wow. Okay. So you've got to coexist and not just be a giver in a certain way. Very nice.
It's mutual.
Yeah, it's mutual. Yeah. Let me also, I know you have already mentioned about the fact that you are looking at building at least 3 other people behind you as you move on, or hopefully for a very long time that doesn't happen. But, if the question of sustainability beyond the person is a very big question for any organization. How is SEWA tackling it? How are you looking at it?
Well, look what happened. One day we all have to move on. That's the cycle of life. We lost our beloved leader in November 2022, and we're still growing, going from strength to strength, if I may say so, in all humility.
Yeah.
Because that was the promise we made to her. That is what we learned from her, that this is a movement and it's not personality based. So speaking for myself, whatever, each one has to chart their own sort of course. My colleagues will do things in their own way. But my idea is to make sure that after me, there are people in place who will take things forward. There's no guarantee of anything in life. I had one person who I had groomed up sort of to be my successor, and she decided to take retirement before me. I said, hello, I'm 10 years older than you. But that also happens, people have things going on in their lives, which we have to accept. So another lesson is to make sure you have a pool of leaders. So if one person has something going on in her life and can't continue, then there are others to take the baton and to move forward. I'm chair of SEWA's Cooperative Federation. I have a good young team there. I have a very capable manager there, and she's taking things forward very well. I mean, I'm available in the background as chair, but I told her that I'm not in charge of operations. I'm not the executive director. So you take all the decisions and I'm here to support. For my social security team, in all honesty, it's more of a challenge because each of the cooperatives has a very capable CEO who's taking the cooperative forward to greater profitability, financial viability. But there needs to be someone who's the glue, who holds it all together. So I'm struggling a bit with that, but we're involved in organizational development processes, as you know. So I think we'll collectively come up with an answer. And
So
we're
what you're
hiring
it's a
people.
very intentional process. It's not something that will just happen. You have
Not
to
at all.
intentionally work on
Not
it. Yeah.
at all. We have to plan for it. We have to do a whole lot of processes, team building, because naturally I've been around so long. So
Correct.
I'm trusted, I'm acceptable, but the team also has to understand that this is what a movement is about. You have to
Right.
pass the baton on. You have to
Absolutely.
empty that chair so that others' leadership develops.
Right.
And I'm very clear on that. So I think that clear message also has to go. And again, back to Ila Ben, who voluntarily at a certain age stepped aside and passed the baton on to some of us. And then it's gone on now to the third generation.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
In a way, coming back to SEWA's work in advocacy, and I think that's one of the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask you this question on how I know you have influenced, SEWA has influenced national legislation on social security for unorganized workers, Street Vendors Act, policy of home-based work, and so on and so forth. Just wanted to ask you, for those organizations or those individuals who want to do advocacy, are there some concrete suggestions that you might want to give us, or how have you all been able to do as much advocacy?
So that's a very good question. I think that the way we've been able to do, back to organizing the basic building block, back to building women's solidarity and sisterhood and the grassroots, and listening to the issues that are bubbling up. The first I told you was lack of financial services and street vendors. That's our longest standing campaign. You mentioned that. From day one, the street vendors of Manik Chowk and others were saying that we are being harassed by the police and the municipality. It took us 40 years, Neharika, to reach the Indian Parliament. So that's the kind of staying power you need. So first, what are the issues? Experience them. So for the younger colleagues, we say, spend time with the women, understand the issues deeply, go deep. Then only we can develop policy briefs and strategies, even to reach up to the Indian Parliament or globally to the ILO or wherever. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, as I said, the advocacy is done with the women. We don't do it for them. So they come and speak for themselves and we are there with them, supporting, encouraging. So they are able to very clearly articulate their own issues, and that has its own power. And the other thing is that nowadays I noticed among young people, there are a lot of people who go and do at Harvard Kennedy School or whatever, some kind of policy course. And I'm thinking, what will you understand about what policies to take up if you haven't done that basic groundwork? So, I always say, please first understand, then you can go and hone your advocacy and policy skills wherever in the world. But first, spend time. Don't be in a hurry. Maybe we don't have time for people to sit for 6 months and listen to women at Shankar Bhuvan anymore. Those days may be gone. But at least in your day-to-day, listen, observe, and then you'll get a handle.
So very good. So what you're saying is context, content, and patience are really important if you want this advocacy to happen. Excellent.
And perseverance. 40 years.
40 years, yeah. Perseverance.
It was 40 years to reach the Indian Parliament. So we haven't given up on universal social protection.
No, not at all. And all power to you for that. So very quickly, coming back to you, Mirai, how would you say is your leadership style? How has it evolved over the last 40 years that you've been working?
Well, first of all, as I've been saying, I had an exceptional role model.
Sure.
But fortunately, somehow, maybe from values of family, working with SEWA, working with the women, I hope, it's for others to judge, that I try to be as inclusive as possible and as democratic as possible. Some of my colleagues give me constructive feedback that you're too democratic. But I believe that there's no such thing as too democratic. You build a consensus, and if it takes time, so be it. So I think a lot of patience and inclusion and democratic governance, listening to voices. These days, I particularly like to listen to younger people's voices because otherwise we get fossilized. We need fresh perspectives, and there are a lot of things that the young can teach us that we don't know. Not just the digital world, but many other things. How the world has changed so much, even in our own country. So I think those are some of the things. I think what I've learned from SEWA is also the importance of self-reliance. I think that tomorrow, if there's an issue with FCRA or whatever, we'll be okay because all our core operations are self-financed through our cooperatives and so on. And our structure is, as we say, like a banyan tree. So if one part of the tree isn't doing so great, there are other aerial roots that are strong and keep the tree firmly rooted to the ground. So I think those kinds of ideas, self-reliance, which was new for me. I didn't know that cooperatives and all these organizations. I learned along the way. So I think some of that, I think being open, as I've been saying for quite some time, and trying to get as many perspectives as possible from the women, of course, but also from all the people, yourself and others who we meet daily in our daily life. You know, just questions that you're asking trigger thoughts and approaches.
Yes.
So I think some of that, and really a commitment, as I've been saying, to passing the baton.
Very nice. Very nice. And are you a taskmaster?
I think I am a bit.
And that's important.
So I do feel that we should adhere to timelines, and we are accountable to the women who we serve, who have so little. So we jolly well perform and perform well and perform in a timely manner, because sometimes they can't wait if our delayed actions is an issue for them. So I make sure. But again, now the culture is set, so I don't have to do much follow-up.
Correct.
I have great leaders and next level people.
You know what? This also is very important, because very often when you're in a social impact organization, there's an expectation that the leader has to be very nice all the time. But nice doesn't mean not expecting the best of the performance. And as you rightly said, your not performing will actually lead to loss, delay in what we have promised to the group that we are committing to. So I think that's very, very powerful.
And I think leading by example, that's what I've learned all these years from my role models and mentors. Lead by example. You have to walk the talk. Otherwise, who will have trust in you? You know, it's the leader who's responsible for creating a culture. And also, I want to say a culture of caring. You can be firm, but there are things, particularly when you work with women, particularly when you work with working class women, because 80% or 85% of our staff are, from working class background. They have a lot to do at home, all the care work, and then they come, their children get sick, their elderly get sick. All that has to be dealt with care.
Yes.
They have people who they have to care for. I remember just quickly, one of my colleagues, her father-in-law, had terminal cancer, and she asked for time off. And, it's not written in our books somewhere, but you just do it because that's the right thing to do. It's the caring thing to do for a colleague who's going through so much. And later when he passed, her husband came to me and said, this was so important to my family that you gave her this time off.
It's very nice.
Do things by instinct because it's the right thing to do. It's the ethical thing to do.
Yes.
Values.
Absolutely. And so important to hear that there is still space and requirement to do the right thing and not what's, just a popular thing in that sense. In retrospect, Mirai, is there something that you would do differently? That's something that you would not repeat if you look back at your career?
Yeah. Well, one personal thing, because I have 3 children, 3 daughters, and when I took over as General Secretary from Ilaben, my twins I had twin daughters as well, were 9 months old, and I was still feeding them and stuff. I used to get on my scooter and zip home to feed them and then come back to office. I think I would do things differently. I tell my younger colleagues that these times don't come again. So, they're all adults and they think I'm silly to bring all this up, my daughters do. But I say to the younger colleagues, spend time with your children.
Yes.
Because that's also a very important contribution towards society. I mean, I'm fortunate I have a very supportive partner, but I somewhere feel a bit of guilt, in all honesty, as I think 99% of working mothers. Yeah, that's just comes with the territory. So I advise my younger colleagues this. But otherwise, mistakes, challenges are part of the course,
Correct.
Dealing with human beings has never been a walk in the park. There are all kinds of human beings.
Absolutely.
And it's enriching also challenging. There are egos to tackle. There are all sorts of things in life. But I guess, again, back to the women, I see how hard their lives are, and yet they persevere. And some of them say, there's drought, but then the rain comes as well. So
Optimism.
they're wise.
Yeah.
They give hope.
They do hope. Yeah. And hope and optimism are so important to have around us and build it as a mindset. Yes. My very last question to you, Mirai, is that there must be younger students who are listening to this who possibly have a public health background, or a management student, or somebody who is in science who's possibly thinking of working in labor rights, women empowerment, or the informal sector. What would be 2 or 3 things that you would tell them that they should keep in mind if that's a path that they're choosing?
The first thing I would say is follow your heart. That is sort of what I did. I was offered a fancy job in the Ford Foundation and I turned it down. They even remind me whenever I meet the ex-director, he says, you turned me down for SEWA. I said, yes, but that's what my heart said. And that's, I never had any regret. So that's one thing. The second thing is that you have to also be clear what are your priorities. And everyone's situation is different. So I'm not here to give formulas and prescriptions.
Absolutely.
Some people need to work for money because they have to support their families or whatsoever. So that's fine. I was lucky that my family was supportive, and even though I had a low-income occupation, I was supported and told, go ahead. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that if you want to work in this sector, I'm afraid you're going to have to be prepared for not having the kind of corporate salaries that your peers might have. So you have to make peace with yourself for that. So that's like, what do you want from life? Do you want to earn money? And some of us have to earn money. There's no option. Even our members have to earn money.
Yes.
They don't have the privilege of choice.
Correct.
I understand that. But then you have to make your choice. You have to understand. And then not look back. I've had colleagues who then compare with their peers who went to management school with, or IRMA, and I tell them, you'll never be satisfied because we can never reach there.
Sure.
So you should understand that before. We'll do our best. We can never reach that level because we're not that kind of creature. We're a different type of organization. We want equity. We don't want a very big difference between us and those that we serve. So those are considerations that, think about carefully. Also, it doesn't have to be a lifetime endeavor. You can commit for some time. You'll learn. It'll be enriching. You'll feel satisfied. And then maybe you'll move on and get a better job somewhere. And you'll always contribute. There are many ways to contribute to society. So I think those are some of the things I find myself telling my younger colleagues when they come up with questions or during interview time.
Sure. And any advice, the last few words for people who want to lead social impact organizations? Anything that you would say? I know we've spoken a lot about, Ila Betail, and really it was very educating and I was very happy to hear about her. But any words that you would like to say for somebody who wants to do social impact leadership?
I think, you have to persist and persevere and be patient. I learned that also. When we started our Ayurvedic business, the first 7 years, we weren't doing well at all. And I said to my colleagues, this is bleeding our pharmacies, so why don't you just wind it up? And they said, give us 1 or 2 more years. Let's be a bit more patient. And sure enough, it's become the biggest revenue earner. So I also had to learn we don't have all the answers. So I think what I've been saying in this conversation, one is organizing, which is the basic building block. Be close to women, listen to them, their talents and insights, which give us direction, but also have patience and persistence. And perseverance, and mostly you'll get there. Sometimes it doesn't work, and then you have to have the courage to wind it up. But
Very
mostly
nice.
It works.
Yeah. So 3 words that keep coming to me as you have been speaking is peace, perseverance, and just trust. Right? So how we trust everyone to do that. So those are the 3 words that are coming to me as
absolutely. As I told you, you hit the nail on the head with your questions. If I may say so, I don't know if I should say so on a program, but I was really impressed with the questions because I felt you went to the heart of the matter. So thank you for your Well, thank you to you and your team for your understanding and your going in depth.
Great. Thank you so much. And really, really a pleasure for hosting you and listening to you. And hopefully we will all continue to learn from you and many leaders like you. So thank you, listeners, for being here, and keep tuned for other conversations that we will have. Thank you, Mirai. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neharika. It was a pleasure for me too.